Hello and welcome to Letters from Camp. I am your host, Mike Penny, and on behalf of the Alumni Association, we are starting this new segment where we learn about some of the people in Winoxet's history and present and future and all of that. So today I have with me as a guest Branden Morris. And Branden, you currently serve as the camp chaplain, but I know you've had a long and varied career when it comes to Camp Winoxet. So why don't we use that as a starting point? Why don't you kind of tell us about your camp story when you first came and kind of the different things you've done around camp?
Excellent. Yeah, and thanks, Mike. Very, very glad to be talking with you. I'm kind of glad that you mentioned not only past, but current and future, because I started to feel a bit like a relic there. Um, my first year attending Camp Winoxet was the summer of 1987. I was a young tenderfoot scout from Troop 10 in Townsend, Massachusetts. And I'd never really been away to camp before. And for some reason, my mother really thought that I was going to be homesick. So she was really surprised when we went to do the drop off at camp. The drop off at camp in '87 was pretty much like how we do it today, a little less organized. We have certainly upped our parking game, that's for sure. But I kind of bounded out of the car and was off and running, and she barely got to say goodbye. So I think she went home and cried some nostalgic tears of not missing her as much. And then she came up for the Wednesday night barbecue that same year. And I think she again kind of expected maybe I've had a rough couple of days, maybe I'd want to come home. And if she was the one telling the story, she would say that I ran her all over camp, showing her every single thing I had done. And it was kind of clear from that first week at camp that I was hooked and just loved it. So I was a camper in 1987, 1988, and 1989. That was the year I served as senior patrol leader of my troop, and that was kind of a neat experience running the whole thing. I was lucky I came from a troop that really was boy-led. I think the leaders just wanted a week of vacation. And even back then, the camp leadership was really good about making sure that adult leaders played the appropriate role and youth leaders in troops played the appropriate role. So that was a great experience kind of leading a large troop at summer camp. I think because of people and friends I had made mostly through the Order of the Arrow back in Quantipan Lodge back in the day, I learned about the CIT program. And so my CIT summer was 1990. And I wouldn't have ever wanted to have left camp at the end. Being a CIT back then was a little bit different than today. I think it was a little more about the free labor and a little less about the development, although we certainly learned how to instruct merit badges, run programs, do things like that. We moved around a couple of years that year. We had a CIT village that was originally some tents, normal two-person wall tents out in what is now the Brownsea area. For some reason that year, we got a donation of a military-style GP medium tent, and that was erected halfway through the year, and we all piled into that. And I can still remember, 25 years later, 30 years later now, so 35 years later? Yeah, probably closer to 35 years. The smell of a musty, mothballed military tent full of 14 teenage boys for a summer. Not the most pleasant of smells. And then I did mostly my full-time staff years from 91 through 93. And I was a Scoutcraft guy. I started off working in Scoutcraft. That was the same year that we started Brownsea. And Winoxet was really one of the first camps in the country to have a dedicated first-year camper program. In fact, the first year we had it, we called it First Year Camper, not the most creative of names. We could have used a little bit of marketing and branding back then. The second year we did it, we called it Brownsea. And I was an assistant director of that in 92, and then I ran the program in 93. And that was just a tremendous experience, seeing young people come to camp for the first time and just making sure they had the best experience possible. The rank advancement was almost secondary to making sure they kind of caught the camp bug in terms of cooking and woods tools and introducing them to knots and lashings and getting exposed to other areas in camp. So that was just a great way to spend my time. 93 was the year I went to college, and unfortunately, I took a bit of a step back then. I did get to spend the summer of 94 serving part-time as a COPE instructor. That was the first year we really had a COPE high course, and there were a couple of us, myself, Jeremy Sappett, some of the older camp-friendly folks, Mark Smith, the Primo brothers, and others, who built the COPE course. And I think both Jeremy Sappett and I spent some time in 94 coming to camp on a periodic basis to run COPE program, which was awesome. And then I took a pretty long hiatus. Real life gets in the way. But I had the opportunity in the year 2002 to come back to camp on a part-time basis as the camp chaplain. And I've done that every year since. So that's 20 years now we've been doing that. And that just remains to me a really important part of my life and a really important connection to camp.
Yeah, I liked what you said about the Brownsea area. When I came back after working at Cub Camp for a number of years, I was the Brownsea director, and I think that's a really important job and position because that's where you get them. And many
Yeah,
camps lose a lot of people after their first year, but I think we have a pretty high retention rate because of that.
absolutely.
That's good.
Absolutely.
So, given your kind of unique perspective, kind of having been there in the 90s and kind of having a little hiatus and then coming back and being there for the past 20 years, what are kind of some of the biggest changes you've noticed? And what are things that you think are kind of eternal and have remained the same?
Certainly a lot of changes in facilities. A lot of facilities have remained the same, which is both a blessing and maybe something we need to address, right? There's some growth that needs to happen there. But it amazes me how names of places have changed over the years. And it's always funny when you talk to a younger staffer or camper these days, and they will say, oh, well, of course, Scoutcraft has always been in this location. And I can think, you know, in my tenure alone, I can think of like it's moved 3 times, if not 4. And if you were to go back to 24, it's probably moved a whole lot more than that. So the idea of like places and names in camp may change, they may migrate, they may shift, but the core of it remains, right? We've had some tremendous growth in facilities, I think, since the mid-90s. We've added lots of new programs. We've improved a lot of things. We've really developed a good culture of investing in the physical plant of the camp. The lake doesn't change. The mountain doesn't change. A campsite is a campsite. But I think we've done a really nice job, especially recently, in keeping up with the kinds of things that units and campers and families want to see to have a good camp experience. I am so glad the shower experience we have today is markedly different than what we had in the late 80s. We've invested in some neat programs that I wish I could have taken advantage of as a kid. So it's nice to have seen the investment from our volunteer base, our donors, our leaders, our youth to keep the physical part of camp up. I think what's really stayed the same is the spirit, frankly. It's fascinating to hear young staff these days echo the same kind of things that probably your generation would have said and heard, the things that I would have said and heard, the leadership that inspired me would have said and heard. We've got a real nice tradition in that area. And I think if we could bottle it somehow and share it with others, that might be a nice thing to do. But it is kind of unique to our place, our people, our culture that's been built up over a very long period of time.
And that kind of perfectly segues to my next question. What do you think it is, or what do you think it is that makes Winoxet unique or special in comparison to maybe other camps you've seen or other places you may have visited?
Yeah, and I've had the chance through some of other scouting roles to see other camps in operation, and there are a lot of great camps around. No disparaging to other ones, and my guess is most every camp would say they've got the same kind of unique things about them. But for me, I think it is that sense of tradition. I can sit at an opening or closing campfire right now, and yeah, some things have changed. We do not play custom-made Winoxet music before them in the 90s and 80s, and that was a kind of a neat addition. But to see people sit in the Kennedy Amphitheater and to get up on stage and sing in some cases the same kinds of songs, and maybe they're new songs, but they sound like they fit in my camp memory. Yeah, I guess that sense of tradition that young people have been camping on the lakes of Thorndike Pond on the shores of Thorndike Pond for years and years and years, or almost 100 years now. It blows my mind. And the names may be a little bit different. The areas in camp may have shifted a little bit, but the fundamental part of living as a scout, living in a patrol in the woods for a week is just fascinating. And I'll tell you, when I come up on Sunday nights to do the chapel service, and then I have to go back home to the real world, it kind of sucks. Like I'd love to be there the whole time. It's great. Yeah, and I think every scout camp can probably claim that. I think the flavor of what we have at Winoxet is just a little bit different.
All right. Before we wrap up, we're going to move to our lightning round. So this will be a recurring segment. And so 5 questions on the board. Just give me your answers as soon as you get it. So here we go. What is your favorite camp song?
It's a little bit of a sad one or a melancholy one, a little bit unusual, but it's a really pretty one. I don't know if we've heard it much recently, but in the early 90s, Rifle Director Ed Dumas brought this, I believe it's a folk song, probably Adam Morris would know just where this comes from. But the verse goes, or the chorus goes, when I first came to this land. And it's just one of those real nice campfires kind of dying low. You get a little bit introspective, just a really pretty song. And I really like that one. I was always a fan of the end of campfire songs, not the beginning of campfire songs.
Gotcha. How about your favorite camp skit?
Oh, easily. The one where people are washing up and they've all got to share the water and things back and forth and they're spitting at each other. I never had to do it. So thankful I never had to do it. That was not my department skit. But man, that's a fun one to watch, even these days.
How about your favorite camp meal?
So this goes a little bit way back. The Wednesday night barbecue used to be actual barbecued chicken. Horrible pain to put on that meal for lots of people. We couldn't do it today. We couldn't do it in the volume we had. But there will forever be a part of my soul that really enjoys sitting on a picnic table on the main field, eating some hopefully fully cooked barbecue chicken on a summer evening. That's quintessential Winoxet to me.
What is your favorite place in camp?
I'm going to be biased. Chapel Point is one of the prettiest places. If you go around the corner from Chapel Point, there are some areas we use for various hors d'oeuvre activities, which always have a soft place in my heart. These days, it's always really fun to be on one of the porches, either the admin building porch or the porch of the boathouse, and just kind of watch camp unfold around you. And this is a real nice, relaxing place to be. All of camp is great. I think once you step through the front gate, you're home. It's great.
And was there someone who was your, summer camp hero or a staff member who you looked up to, when you were a camper?
Oh God, there's a whole generation of them. And I could list a lot of names and probably forget somebody, but I think top of the heap is going to have to be Steve Hoff. So Steve is a good friend of mine currently. Was one of my mentors when I was a young person. He was, I think, like the scout craft director when I was a camper. And man, he could just do everything. He could cook, he could light fires, he could make things explode. He was just like the scout. And I just thought he was just a really great guy, really nice guy. And I'm really glad, like I think of all the relationships I've had out of camp, and there are tons of them. That's a real special one. I really look up to Steve a whole lot. And now to see him be a scoutmaster himself, have a family, have kids of his own who work in camp staff, it's neat to see that whole thing kind of continue. And it's always good when there's a Hoff at Winoxet.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Brandon, for joining us today. And
My pleasure.
For our viewers, be on the lookout for new episodes dropping monthly. And this has been Letters from Camp.